straight money over blitzes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to start off this by saying I didn't want to make this episode. I really didn't, but I feel like it's my duty, my responsibility to you guys, the listeners, to bring this information to you. And if it means I have to be the bearer of bad news, then so be it. I will take on that responsibility for you guys to put you guys in the best position to succeed in your dynasty formats, your redraft formats, all types of fantasy, whatever you play, and just get a better understanding and a better grasp of game theory and the inner workings of the NFL and all things as it ties into fantasy. So I just want to start off by saying that because it's going to be pretty bleak this episode. But with all that being said, we're not going to try and be too bleak on it. Welcome back for another episode of the Money Over Blitzes podcast. My name's Kyle, and today we're going to talk about Cam Akers. Unless you've been living under a rock, we all know on July 20th, we all got the terrible news that Cam Akers tore his Achilles just before getting into training camp. Terrible, devastating injury, especially for running backs, but we're going to get into that a little bit. Really delve into the history behind it and what it can mean for a player of Akers' caliber. So, with the torn Achilles, he's done for the 2021 season before it even started. That really sucks. I didn't have any shares of Cam Akers myself. I do have one share of Darrell Henderson, who we'll talk about a little bit. So it looks like he's going to be the next lead back. So I'm looking to do something with him because it's on a rebuilding team. But for Cam Akers, surgery, that's absolutely going to happen. From all the reports that have come out, that's going to be a must for him. As far as recovery goes, so anywhere between 8 to 12 months. I've seen a lot of reports say 9-month recovery, so that seems about right. Regardless, he's going to miss this season, so that's a big blow for the Rams, who were looking to contend, especially after they made the playoffs last year and made the trade for Matthew Stafford. Offense was looking like it was going to be in really good shape this year. Had a lot of high hopes for Cam Akers. I know a lot of people drafted him pretty early in their startup drafts, and I don't think any redraft drafts have really happened yet, but in their dynasty drafts, a lot of people were taking him in the second, third round of their drafts, so high expectations for Cam Akers, and to see this kind of injury is really a devastating blow for the team and for a lot of rosters. So I want to get people prepared for what's to come, what to expect, and as we always say in the fantasy community, or at least I like to coin the phrase of like Bruce Lee used to say, be water. So things happen on a day-to-day basis, especially in Dynasty. There's no real off season. There's no taking a break. Injuries happen, things happen, situations change. So we have to be water as Dynasty managers and look to make moves to make sure that we're not in a complete mess on our rosters. So what does this mean for the Rams? Oh, I'm sorry. One other thing I want to take note of too is this is now the third injury in a little over a year in the NFL. So of course he missed, I think it was about 3 or 4 games with the rib cartilage injury to start the year. So that was a little bit tough. And then he missed another game with an ankle sprain. So been tough go for Cam Akers. Of course he did have that stretch of games where he did really well, and then going into the playoffs he did really well. But it wasn't without having his fair share of injuries already. He's only obviously played 1 year so far in the NFL, so not a good start for Cam. But what does this mean for the Rams now? Like I said, Darrell Henderson's likely going to take over that lead back role. They do have Xavier Jones and Jake Funk, who are both late round picks, and I think Jake Funk was undrafted behind Darrell Henderson in the depth chart, so not a ton behind Henderson. Henderson was a 3rd round pick, I believe, and he's really probably the most talented back they have, and odds are I expect them to try and sign somebody off the street, maybe make a trade, but as far as free agents goes, Todd Gurley, of course, comes back to mind. Adrian Peterson's still floating out there available. He's looking for work right now and says he's ready to go. And Devontae Freeman's another one. Played with the Giants last year. Played a few games. I think as a contender, it's only right for the Rams to sign somebody. But I do think that Darrell Henderson, it's going to be his backfield to lose, really, now that Akers is out. So I think anybody that they sign or trade for, it's really just going to be for depth because, of course, as a contender, you want to keep as much as that depth as possible as you can. You expect to make a long run during the season and into the playoffs. You need as many pieces as you can to maintain that push for hopefully a Super Bowl title for them. So as far as Cam Akers goes, what does this mean for his long-term value and his stock, if you have anything? To me, I think Akers' days as a lead back are now over. And it sucks to say that because it felt like they barely started. But with an Achilles tear, it's very, very tough to come back from. And we'll get into the particulars in a little bit. But my overall premise, and that's why I say, this is going to be a tough episode to maybe a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. But it's in some ways, it's kind of a death sentence for running backs. So, from the onset, it's very tough to regain speed and explosiveness after an Achilles tear. There's not a lot of blood flow that goes to that part of your ankle, back part of your ankle, so it can take a while to heal. And when you look at the running back position, the amount of cutting, stopping, starting, turning, accelerating, all that you have to do, it takes a lot, obviously, on your feet and on your ankles. So there's a lot there that your Achilles kind of is responsible for. So it's going to be tough to come back from for sure. There was actually a study done in 2017 by Dr. Celine Parrick and Dr. Jay Shah that cited a 78% decrease in power ratings over the over 3-year period. And this was in regards to running back specifically. And then 26% of the players that suffered an Achilles tear never actually returned to play. And the study was performed on players for between the years 2010 and 2015. There was a total of 78 Achilles tendon injuries that happened during that time. And like I said, a lot of it was, a loss of power and explosiveness, especially at the running back position. That's all stuff that's very important for you to have. So in a lot of ways, that kind of killed off a lot of players' careers. And then, certain players did manage to come back. Terrell Suggs is one that comes to mind. Demaryius Thomas is another one that comes to mind. Different positions, though, and different requirements on the body and on your feet, playing outside linebacker, playing wide receiver versus playing running back in the NFL. So looking at that study, it didn't bode well for Akers and his long-term prospects in my mind. Of course, we can go into some of the history with torn Achilles and some running backs that have gone through it and some of the situations that they dealt with and what kind of turned out for them. So the first guy we can talk about is Lendale White. He was a second-round pick in 2006. Did have a couple good years, but tore his Achilles in 2010. Never played another NFL snap. So that's already kind of one strike on the board for a guy that never came back to play again. Another guy we could talk about, Mikel LaShore. He was another second-round pick in 2011 draft. Same situation as Cam Akers, second-round pick. He tore his Achilles in rookie training camp. He did come back for almost 800 yards and 9 touchdowns that following year. So his second year in the league after he had that injury. Of course, he sat out the first year. But the next year he came back. He had a pretty productive season. However, he was cut the following season and then never played an NFL snap. I think he was supplanted by Reggie Bush. And I remember reading somewhere, it was kind of a note. They wanted to address the position again because of that lack of explosiveness from LaShore. Again, you can attribute a lot of that to the Achilles tear. You lose explosiveness when you tear that tendon, and it's hard to get that back. Chris Beanie Wells is another example. First-round pick in 2009. He actually had a couple solid years. He had his rookie year, and then in 2011 he had another solid year. I think he rushed for 1,000 yards, so solid player overall. He tore his Achilles in 2013 in a workout with the Baltimore Ravens and never played another snap in the NFL. Of course, at that time he was 26 years old. You could make the argument that he was kind of on his way out in terms of the running back life cycle. But in reality, I mean, you can still have some good years in your 26, 27 years old. It's when you get to the high 20s that you start to really fade away when you're looking at running backs. But you can argue that he had that he had that tear, and that pretty much that set a chain effect for why he would be less effective in those years to come, and why teams weren't really looking into him, into signing him and having him on their roster. So it's tough. Of course, most recently, Marlon Mack last year, he was a fourth round pick in 2017. He had 1,000 yards in 2019, so he had that really good season, and tore his Achilles the first game last year, and it was really tough to see. But he was 24 at the time of injury, but the team had already drafted Jonathan Taylor, so you can make the argument that teams are, the Colts were already kind of looking to move on to another running back, and maybe either have a committee approach or something along those lines where Marlon Mack wasn't going to be the feature guy. But it's tough to see because Jonathan Taylor now is, everyone looks at him as the guy in the backfield, and Marlon Mack getting the Achilles tear, that doesn't help. Of course, we saw what Jonathan Taylor did last year, and he started to catch on towards the end of the year and really started to take the backfield for himself, take over the reins, and really show what he can do. What does that mean for Marlon Mack? It'll be interesting to see what happens this year in his first year back and what he can do in that backfield. But again, it doesn't really help his case, and especially in terms of fantasy, where now he's going to be sharing the backfield with already Jonathan Taylor, and he's going to be fighting for every snap that he can get because Jonathan Taylor's already solidified himself there as the lead back just based on availability. Of course, Jonathan Taylor's talented, but availability is one of the best abilities you can have in the NFL, especially at the running back position. It's very hard to come by. They take a beating every year, especially all the hits they take and all the abuse that they take. So NFL teams, they just draft that next guy, draft that next guy, draft that next guy, and kind of just weed through them. And then even more so, running backs don't get paid really over their second contract unless you're a true difference maker like a Christian McCaffrey. Saquon Barkley might get a second contract. Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, those really top tier guys. Those are the ones that really get, those long-term opportunities in the NFL. Lower guys, they don't really get that. They just, okay, teams rather just draft the next guy and get a guy at a discount and just keep the wheels turning as far as that goes. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Marlon Mack. This will be an interesting case study, but again, I don't see him getting anywhere near 1,000 yards like he did back in 2019. Now you have Jonathan Taylor there, and you're already good to go. So he'll probably be kind of a spell guy, but I don't think you can expect any kind of productivity like he had in years past. So to me, how this all kind of ties into Cam Akers, I think his days are over as a starting running back. And like I said, it's really tough to say that because he never really had the full chance to really get that. But it's kind of just, it seems to be the way it goes. Medical advancements have been made, so it's possible for Akers to return. We see guys like Kevin Durant in basketball. He had the Achilles tear, was out for a year. Took a little bit of time for him to come back, but now he's in peak form. It's a different sport. Body has different. The sport commands different things from your body, but it's at least encouraging to see that play out and see maybe there is some hope for Cam Akers, but the odds are not in his favor. The history doesn't seem to be on his side just based on the certain case studies that we looked at, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but high turnover at the running back position for most teams, like I just mentioned before. They'd rather just draft the next guy. It's that much cheaper. You don't want to lose production at the running back position. It is pretty important, obviously between establishing a run game and then nowadays all these athletes, you having them catching passes out of the backfield too, so you don't really want to miss a beat. So they'd rather just get that next guy in there and just keep the wheels turning. And it's going to be tough because now you're talking about Akers being on the shelf for a year. It's going to hurt his long-term prospects and also likely to affect him long-term as well, just based on that case study that was done back in 2017. You're talking about a lack of explosiveness, lack of speed, lack of power, and it's very, very hard to get all that back. It'll be interesting to see how Akers comes back, if he's able to. I hope so. I don't ever wish injury on anybody, but yeah, I'm not holding out a ton of hope for Cam Akers and his true workhorse fantasy production long term. I think this year what we'll see from the Rams is, Darrell Henderson should probably step up to the plate. As long as he has a healthy season, he should step up to the plate and produce. When he was on the field, that first quarter of the season before the injury, he was actually doing pretty well. He had quite a few double-digit games. He had a couple 20-point games in PPR leagues, so he was holding his own. And then, of course, he got hurt. Cam Akers came on, and he showed out a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see for sure what kind of happens. And I'm not sure what the Rams will end up doing as far as behind Darrell Henderson, whether they sign another running back or just kind of keep with status quo. We'll have to see what happens with that. Going into next year, I kind of expect them to invest some kind of draft capital in another running back, which, again, that kind of throws doubt to how Cam Akers is going to end up doing. Does he end up just going right back to that lead role? I highly doubt it. I think they're going to go with some kind of committee approach, and I'll be curious to see if Akers ends up having any more injuries, in the years to come. Usually, with a lot of these running backs, it'll start with the Achilles or it starts with an ACL, and then those injuries kind of follow after that because now you're dealing with weakened ligaments. So it starts to affect other things within your leg because your body's trying to compensate for the weakness in one spot to try and make up for it in another spot, and your body just kind of starts to break down at that point. So it's going to be very tough, and it's going to be very tough for Akers to deal with. Of course, he has now the full year to try and come back. At least he got hurt during the training camp time, so he'll have this full season to try and recuperate, come back into next year. We'll see how he looks going into training camp and next year. Hopefully he doesn't lose too much of that explosiveness because, I was excited for Cam Akers too. I'll fully admit that. I have no problem admitting that, but I just don't know how he's going to end up coming back from it and how he's going to look long term at this point. And just, again, it's always next man up in the NFL. So hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong on this assessment, but the numbers and the history do not point in his favor, unfortunately. So as dynasty owners, as managers of Cam Akers, you want to do accordingly. Just take this information for what it is. Like I said earlier, just be water. So what that means, if you're a contender, I would look to try and sell off Cam Akers for anything you can get. Some people may still be a believer in Cam Akers, and it's going to be tough to really sell him for anything more than a one. I think would be really great to have, but even if you can get a couple of smaller running back pieces to help fill in the voids, because again, as a contender, you're just looking for bodies at that point. You still need production at those positions in those slots in your lineup, and just get whatever points you can. In a rebuild, I could see maybe holding on to him if you really believe that he's going to be fine over the long run. And if you're in a rebuild, you're not in need for the points anyway. So I could see a world where you would want to keep him. But to me, I think you try and sell him off for whatever you can get, whether it's a 1 or a 2 plus something. And it hurts to say it, but again, it does not bode well for running backs. That getting that kind of injury, it just does not look well for them long term. So I'm of the mind I'd rather get something for somebody instead of nothing. So I think that's what I would do in those types of situations. If you have Darrell Henderson, congratulations, you just hit gold. whether or not you were a contender or not, or if you had Akers and then Henderson as a handcuff, good for you. So you're all good to go for the most part. I think Henderson will be just fine for you, and as long as you have the depth behind him, you're good to go. As a rebuilder, I would look to sell Darrell Henderson for whatever you can get. I know I'm trying to do that in one league. Again, it's just the nature of the running back position. I don't think going into past next year or past this year, they'll be sticking with just Darrell Henderson. I think they'll look to address the position at somehow, some way, to where even if it's a committee position or if Akers comes back, then you're back to Darrell Henderson being the number 2 guy. But I think that you kind of just walked into a little bit of a gold mine with having Darrell Henderson on your roster, so I'd be looking to sell him while I can. But that's all I got for this episode. Again, not the most upbeat kind of episode, but I'd rather have you guys informed and in the loop and just kind of thinking about these things as they happen. Again, especially with Dynasty, there's no off season, so there's always moves to be made and strategies to think about and just things you want to do in order to keep your team afloat and in the best position to succeed. So hope you guys enjoyed, hope you guys were informed, and I hope you learned something new. All right, thanks guys. Peace.